You're asking yourself in the relationship, there's a problematic dynamic or something's happening, and you're asking yourself, is this something that I can't live with? Or am I just being too picky? Am I compromising too much? Am I sacrificing too much? You might also be asking, are we just going through a rough patch? Or is this who we really are or who they really are? And it's really not something that's going to change. And it's not something that I can accept going forward. It's something that's not just a symptom of something deeper that can be fixed, but it's more characterological. And then the final question is, if I stay, will I resent this? Or on the flip side, if I leave, will I regret it later? So to help you answer these questions, what I want to try to break down is, what are deal breakers actually? Like, how do we define deal breakers? How do you know if that's what you're dealing with? And if you are dealing with deal breakers, how can you assert these? How can you communicate these in your relationship? So the very term deal breaker implies that there's a deal, right? That you're in some kind of deal. And as unromantic as that sounds, relationships are deals in a way, right? Like, you've made an agreement. There's expectations that you have when you make this agreement and you make this deal of marriage. You have an understanding. Usually you should have a shared understanding of what that actually means. And if you got married in church, then it's vows that you've taken. And if the agreement or if the vows have been broken or have not been honored, then technically speaking or legally speaking, either party is free to walk away because the vow's been broken. It's already broken, right? So that's why it's crucial that you have a shared understanding of what you can expect in the relationship. What have we agreed to? Are we both okay with what we've agreed to? And are we holding up our end of what we've agreed to? There's a caveat here, is that sometimes there's going to be a failure of execution on the deals that we make. So there's a difference between doubling down on what's a deal breaker and recognizing, I know that this is a deal breaker. I have failed, but that's not my vision for our future. And I'm committed to doing better. To me, that's not a deal breaker. But let's say you have a shared understanding, or let's say you thought you had a shared understanding of what your marriage was or what it should be, and it's not going that way. It's not what you signed up for, right? And now the question becomes, is this a deal breaker? So Dr. Bethany Marshall, she wrote a book on deal breakers. She says that a deal breaker is the one character flaw. It doesn't have to just be one, but it could just be one character flaw, emotional stance, or pattern of behavior that significantly damages the quality of the relationship. Now, most relationships are, of course, not perfect, and all relationships, every even really healthy, happy marriages are going to have some annoyances or transgressions or disappointments or things that happen that register as, this is not okay, or this is a betrayal. But when you're facing a deal breaker, you're looking at a non-negotiable term that if it's not agreed to, it will kill the deal. So this is where that distinction comes in. It's like, it's not just a failure of execution. It's that you actually can't agree on the terms, right? And what you're experiencing as a deal breaker, your partner is saying, I think it's fine. And they're not recognizing that as something that needs to change. So an example of a deal breaker could be a lack of emotional reciprocation or emotional investment. Like, let's say your partner just is not as emotionally invested and you feel like you're always giving all the time and they're not giving anything back. That could be a deal breaker. Or ongoing infidelity, abuse, or a personality disorder, or addiction that is causing all kinds of chaos in your family. That could be a deal breaker. So deal breakers are not just minor annoying habits, and they're not just one bad thing that's happened that's unrelated to other problems. So to be a deal breaker, it has to be something that destroys something that is precious to you. So your life dreams have to be at stake for it to be a deal breaker. Am I going to be sacrificing my life dreams? Am I going to be sacrificing the health of my future generations? What is precious to you, and is this being destroyed? That's a deal breaker. It also has to undermine the very conditions that make it possible to love. It has to point to everything else that's wrong with the relationship. So, like I said, it's not something that's isolated and unrelated to everything else. It's the tip of the misery iceberg, as she says. Deal breakers are also often something that show themselves early on, but the symptoms get deeper as the relationship progresses. There's red flags earlier on, but the good still outweighs the bad. And it becomes a deal breaker when now there's not enough health in the marriage dynamic to balance that out. And also, deal breakers hold the potential to become a tool for positive change. So that's the good news, is that if you can approach this the right way and you're very clear within yourself about why it's a deal breaker for you and what needs to happen and what must happen instead, there's a possibility that you can come together and that can be a catalyst for radical transformation in the relationship. And I've talked about this before. The crisis is the opportunity. The breakdown is the path to break through. It's not always going to turn out that way because it's going to ultimately, in the end, require both people for that to happen when you're dealing with deal breakers. So if what you're dealing with meets these criteria, then you have to ask yourself, how do I bring this up? How can I approach this in my relationship? According to Dr. Marshall, in her book, she identifies 6 ways that you can assert your deal breakers in relationships. The first one is know yourself. And you're going to ask yourself the following questions. Do the emotions that I have in this relationship feel familiar? What is it that makes it hard for me to think clearly? Be honest with yourself about what you really want and not just what you think you should want. So this is the hard part because sometimes what is a deal breaker for us, we think maybe shouldn't be because other people are okay with it. Or maybe we question our own values if we hold something dear. So this is like a soul searching of sorts in really being honest with yourself. How important really is this to me? The point of the question around, is this familiar to me? If there's unmet needs from childhood, that's why I asked that question. The reason I highlighted this question is because it speaks to this idea that if you come to the relationship like most of us do with some things that are unhealed in us, that will be evoked in the relationship, that will be activated by the relationship. That doesn't mean it's a deal breaker. So we have to separate it out. That just means that this is the perfect opportunity to bring the unhealed parts forward and the relationship becomes the healing container. So that question is designed for you to look inward and say, okay, if this feels really familiar, then part of the reason why it feels unbearable and why it might feel like a deal breaker is because it's touching on pain, old unhealed pain from a time in your life where you had no power. And so now you're feeling that same level of power and you think that the only way out is to leave the marriage. That's not necessarily the case. So you really want to check that. If your emotions that you're experiencing with this deal breaker are familiar, you want to give pause and you want to take extra caution to not be hasty in making a decision and deciding this is a deal breaker, because there's a 50-50 chance that actually, if you can heal some of that inside yourself, that it won't even be a deal breaker for you, because they're just activating something that already lives in you, right? So that's how you know the difference. So you just have to be really honest with yourself. What is it that you really want? What must I have? And what am I really willing to stand on and take major risks and leave my comfort zone for? That's how you know that you're dealing with a deal breaker. So the first part is self-exploration. The second step is you have to be aware of personality problems. Now, Dr. Marshall identifies several personality traits in men, but that's kind of what she's focusing on in her book. But in my experience, all of the patterns she identifies can be found in anyone. So I'm going to share these. You can see if these ring true for you. This is not even related to the DSM or any kind of personality disorders, but these are patterns that she describes that I thought resonated. So then the first is a script writer. So if you're dealing with a spouse who they're writing the script of your relationship, they've decided who you are without consulting you. And so you often feel very misunderstood and you feel like a character in their play. And so you spend a lot of time trying to defy their perception of you and their pigeonholing of you. So for example, if your partner comes to the relationship and they're afraid of being taken to the cleaners, so now you feel like you have to pay for everything in order to avoid being typecast as I'm not that person. Their narrative is informing your behavior in a way that makes you inauthentic and you don't really feel seen for who you are. If that's happening pervasively and you're being dictated by that narrative, that is something that you strongly feel is not about you, but it's getting projected onto you and now it's informing how you show up and it feels toxic, that would be a deal breaker. Then there's the person in charge personality type, and this type of person is really intolerant towards people in situations that they can't control. So it's controlling behaviors, right? They may be very reliable and they may seem very caring, but you could feel really smothered. If they're not the originator or the facilitator of the positive experiences, then they're going to kind of be a buzzkill for those experiences. If they're not the center of it or the source of it, then they don't want any part of it. And so they're not going to add their energy to what you're creating. So you feel like this is somebody who will take the wind out of your sails a lot. They're not going to cheer you on. They're not going to be enthusiastic unless you're adding your energy to something that they want to do. There's also the person without fault. This is the person who just cannot self-reflect. This falls under the narcissism category. Rarely takes responsibility for their actions and feelings. They overvalue their achievements and they deny their impact on others around them. They deny or they dismiss or they minimize the impact, or they say that any impact that they have is basically your fault. Everything that you experience is on you. It's a you problem all the time, right? They're always going to put it back on you no matter what, pervasively. Now, sometimes that's going to happen in a relationship. Sometimes somebody might hold a boundary and say, I don't feel like that's about me. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when it's at the level where it's so pervasive that it's like this person really will not ever take ownership. That's obviously a problem. And you cannot have a healthy relationship with somebody like that. I would put that in the category of a precondition. Then there's the invisible person. This is the person that's emotionally very constricted and they're sort of shut down, especially when things get sensitive or loaded or emotional. And you feel like they're not really there. They're not even sticking their neck out enough. They're not showing their cards to you. They're not really giving you enough of what's going on truly, but behind the curtain for you to engage with, to have a deeper emotional intimacy with. So this is not necessarily a person who is verbally abusive or emotionally abusive or hyper toxic in a transgressive way, but they more just won't share themselves to the degree that you have to have in a healthy relationship. And if you're in marriage, not just for domestic partnership and financial advantage and legal, reasons, and you're in marriage because you want to have a deep emotional intimacy and sense of partnership and sharing of your inner worlds with each other and to be on the same team in life, then this type of personality is going to be a deal breaker for you. And then finally, a child posing as an adult. She says that this type of person avoids responsibility for themselves. So they can be exciting and pleasure seeking, but they have difficulty being alone and their actions will contradict their words. They tend to be more irresponsible. They're not thinking about the long-term impact. They are the big dreamers and they'll get frustrated if you don't go along with that, but they're not really thinking long term and they're not willing to bend on that or to really take ownership of the long term impact of their decisions now, much like a child, right? A child will get caught up in the excitement and they're not able to think like an adult. And some of us have arrested development. Most of relationship problems in adulthood come from our adaptive child, which is the wounded child's version of an adult. And it's protective mechanisms that result in arrested development, right? So this is super common and there's no shame in this, but being able to actually recognize that that's what's going on is super important. Now, obviously, I touched on the personality type that falls under narcissism. We've talked about narcissism before, and abuser types absolutely fit this category. And if you're also dealing with someone who is in an active cycle of addiction that's creating chaos and disrupting your core values at home, then that's also obviously a deal breaker. But I really like the way she broke those down because these are not in the DSM. These are not the things that we normally think of. But if you're with somebody like that, you know what she's talking about and it really resonates. So if let's say you have identified this and you're like, yep, I can see that this is what that is. I am dealing with a deal breaker. The third thing you have to do then is confront that. Confront that with your spouse. So obviously, first you're going to ask yourself, what's the non-negotiable? What's the must-have? And be able to articulate that, like I talked about in the first step. But to get it clear, like how am I going to actually articulate this to be prepared for the conversation? You don't want to just blurt it out. You have to be very intentional about how you communicate this and lead with your vision. So this is what I need to have in describing what you want instead. And if things don't change, can I live with it? If something feels unacceptable in the future, when you imagine, would I be unhappy with this 10 years from now? It's probably unacceptable now. And the only reason you're accepting it is because you think it might change. So once you've assessed that, you have to be able to articulate exactly what that is. This is the thing that's unacceptable. That this is still very abstract. I'm going to give an example. With the addiction one, it might be the problem is the drinking. You have too many drinks. If they start to get really granular with you on this and they're like, but sometimes I only have this many drinks, or they want to argue about, I don't always drink that much, or I don't drink every day. And then now you're in the argument about that. It's like, it's not about the drinks. It's about the behavior when you drink. It's about what happens as a result of that. There's a lot of things that your spouse with the deal breakers can take issue with. So you have to be prepared to identify exactly, here's what it is. Because they might not agree with you. I'm not addicted. I don't have an addiction. What are you talking about? You have to be able to say, it's these behaviors, it's these things that are happening that I cannot accept. It's the language that you use. It's the way that you don't go to work the next day. It's the way that the kids don't know what's happening. It's the excuses I have to make for you. It's the job jeopardy that you're in. It's the DUI. It's the, all these other things that come from that. So be prepared because they may disagree with you. And so you want to be very clear on what that is, describing exactly what's not okay and what you must have instead. And obviously, if it's something like addiction, it could be something as big as, okay, I'm going to go to treatment, but it's ultimately, that's just the route, right? Treatment is a route to the outcome. The outcome is a life of sobriety. The outcome is a healthy life that is free of addiction. So treatment might be a step to get there, but it's not the end all be all, right? So you have to be really clear about what's the end goal. It's not treatment. It's not like I want you to be in treatment. That's not my goal, is for you to be in treatment. My goal is for us to have this kind of life. That's what you want to be able to describe. After you've then confronted that and you've shared that, there may be some guilt, there may be some self-doubt, there may be some self-blame that comes as a result of that. And I think that, well, the fourth step she says is to stop the self-blame. I personally think that the reason why we blame ourselves about things like this is because if we blame ourselves, then we have the illusion of control. If it's our fault, then we can fix it. And that feels better than not having control. So if you can stop the self-blame first and then grieve the loss of what you don't have control over, that will help a lot. Own your own neuroses, own your own triggers, own your own meaning making and feelings and dreams and must-haves, right? Own it all, the stuff that's on your side of the street, but do not take all the responsibility for a joint dynamic. And you might have to do some core belief work around that in order to do that successfully and consistently. And then the fifth thing you have to do is you have to assert yourself by revealing, and I did touch on this already, by giving them specific examples, giving them a chance to respond. What do you need them to say in this moment? Not just what they're going to give to you, what would have to change in the long term, but what can they give to you right now? So that's the distinction between like sharing what you want for the future, but also knowing when you're asserting what you have to have, what do you want out of that conversation? There's a long-term goal that you need to see, but there's also for that conversation, what's your short-term outcome ideally? What do you want to hear them say? Know what that is and ask for that. Give them a chance to give that to you, see what their solutions would be. And you can even ask the question, what can you or what would you be willing to do to make the situation better? To see what they come up with, and you might be pleasantly surprised. You don't have to do all the work by laying it all out, right? You can do as much as you can with what you do know and share what you do know, but there might be some things that they think of that you didn't even think of. And so it isn't all up to you to figure all of that out. Your job is to come forward and say, this is what's not working. This is what I have to have instead. And then ask the question, is that something you can give? Here's what I'm really looking to hear right now. Here's what I'm hoping for. And then at that point in time, it feels powerless because now it's the ball is in their court. What are they going to do with that information? Ultimately, hopefully they'll meet you there. But it is a risk. And a lot of times people don't want to confront this, or they don't want to speak it, and they don't want to actually force the question because they're afraid that they're not going to get the answer that they want. And then what are they going to do with that? They'd rather be in denial. I mean, most of us would like to stay in our comfort zone. That's just what we do for survival, right? So being willing to be so clear and forcing the question and then relinquishing control to see what they're going to do with that information and hope that they'll do the right thing with that information is terrifying. But you really do want to have the answer to that, because the longer that you live without the answer, the longer you are tolerating what you really don't want to be tolerating. And so every day that goes by that you're staying in your comfort zone is one more day that you're choosing to dishonor yourself and what you need for your relational health, but also your future generations potentially too. And then the final step is you have to have the willingness to walk away. And this is something that can be felt when you're dealing with deal breakers and your partner who has these deal breakers or is engaging in deal breaker behaviors knows you're not going anywhere. Sometimes they just won't change it. Not because they don't love you, but because what they're grappling with is so strong that there's not enough force to override it. It would require being willing to walk away to generate enough force through panic, through, oh my gosh, okay, now I really need to figure this out. Like that's sometimes what it really takes. This cannot be faked. You have to really know, I am willing to walk away. If you're not willing to walk away over your deal breakers, then you're asking them to do for you what you can't do for your own self. And ultimately, that's not a functional adult mindset, because we're asking them to take care of us in that way that we haven't fully evolved enough to be able to take a stand for ourselves. Right. And that's hard because sometimes a lot of the deal breakers are connected to unmet needs from childhood or unhealed things. And so it's hard to separate that out. This is the most excruciating part, is doing the inner work of getting to the point of like, I am willing to walk away. I am willing to take a stand. And if I don't, then I'm in a place of acceptance because I'm choosing it. And that's empowering. That's way better than feeling like you're trapped in a deal breaker situation. So if you think about how hard this is, if you think about like, well, I'm not ready yet, or this is just really overwhelming, I don't know if I can do that, I will share with you the quote that I really resonated with in her book. She says, loss can be negotiated and reputations can be repaired, but a life can never be relived. So make sure that you're living it with the right person. And I would add to that, don't let fear be what guides you, because what keeps you safe in what's familiar, it can't support your growth, and it can't support your expansion into what is meant for you and what your divine journey is, what your personal unique journey is in this life. And sometimes we have to take a stand for our values over the person that we love. And it doesn't mean we don't love them. It just means we might not be able to share a roof with them. And that's really sad. Is a devastating truth to come to if we get to that point. But the strength that you develop from being able to get to that place, even just internally before you have these conversations, will actually paradoxically set you up potentially for a better outcome. Because energetically, your spouse, when they feel that you might be willing to walk away over it, they really can tell, is oftentimes the wake-up call that they need. And they also need to grow, and it's in their best interest. Sometimes holding that line and the willingness to walk away is not an act of abandonment. It's actually offering an opportunity for growth that they will thank you for later, and feel grateful for, and feel like I couldn't have done it on my own. And I'm glad that you took a stand for the health of our relationship over me, because now we both have the best of us, right? That we could have together. Otherwise, the story would have had a very different ending. And I've seen that happen so many times, I can't even count. And so there is that hope that if you are grappling with it and you can confront it, that there can be some shifts in the ninth hour, at the last minute. Sometimes the breaking point is that opportunity for redemption or transformation. But even if not, at least you walk away knowing that you're honoring yourself and your values, and you're going to be your healthiest self, because it is a big price to pay to be married to somebody for the rest of your life. When you're dealing with deal breakers, the cost is just too high. And so everybody else that you're in relationship with ends up not getting the best of you. And so it's actually not selfish decision, because there's more of you than for other people who need you too. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel, or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.